Hey everybody. Um, Weird technical difficulty real quick. I have to actually step away from the camera real quick. Sorry. I'll be right back. That was exciting. Uh, what a wonderful start to a stream. Hey Logan, welcome. Yeah, evidently I left my phone somewhere in the house and it was going off, and my wife is sleeping. Hopefully she's still sleeping. Hey mages. Wow, well, I'm not a wizard, so I'm not a mage. Although I guess by old school standards, I might be a fighter mage because depends on if I'm elf by race or class. Uh, Jim Cody, welcome. And I have a bear in the house here. Uh, Now I'm all winded from running upstairs because I'm old and fat. Good morning, folks. Another casual stream for today. I may have let it slip on John's stream last, but I'm working a shit ton of overtime, and so my free time for coming up with creative stuff is just very limited. Um, uh, well, it's modern day wizardry, isn't it? But it's yeah, I'm working a lot of overtime, so I've literally working 6 days a week at this point, 10 hours a day. Oh, and yeah, it is kind of the usual suspects. If we can get grumpy old Slan here and General Nut, and I'm sure John will show up at some point. I know Sundays aren't his best day to participate. So, bottom line, I really have nothing profound or all that entertaining to talk about today. So, I figured I'd just kind of bring it in and open up discussion, gaming in general. I think I'll throw a link here in the chat for folks who wanted to come on screen. I almost did a stream on finding and making time for hobby stuff, but I haven't been succeeding all that well in that. So I feel like it would have been a lot of untested advice. Fortunately, my day job is such that I can still tinker around with some gaming stuff now and again. So I'm not dead in the water. And we have a bear.
Hey
Welcome,
there,
sir.
hi there, hi there.
How's it going, man?
Oh, lazy Sunday. Just taking it easy. Didn't even bother putting on a shirt today, so that's why you're getting the no tan.
I understand. I would be lying if I'd said that at least once or twice, even on my work shift, considering I have to be on camera in the middle of the summer when AC wasn't working, I'd be down here just my boxers and, and a t-shirt. So how's your hibernation going?
Well, it goes. Just made a video on my Discord about my RPG collection sale, and people are sort of starting to PM me about stuff they want from my collection, so that's nice. But otherwise, enjoying the end of July, and getting through the dog days of summer, as they say. How are you doing?
Doing all right. Pulling in Logan here from the hilt.
Morning.
Hey, Logan.
Yeah,
There? Morning. How you doing, Eli?
Doing all right. Sounds like you're just waking up, man.
Oh yeah. I've been sleeping for a change and taking a break. I took Bear's advice, and I'm just deciding to unplug a little bit.
Not a bad idea.
Man. It's got to be done. You could just
do it. Yeah, I've been doing all right, Bear. Like I was mentioning just a moment ago, I'm working a ton of overtime. My other half isn't working currently. She's out on leave, medical leave. So, uh, trying to trying to make up the difference there.
Now, does she get benefits for medical leave, or is it unpaid?
So that's a big deal. The last time she took leave, it was no problem. She had to go for about 2 weeks while the leave process caught up with the pay schedule before she started pulling a check. But right now, where we're at here in Missouri, she can't get in to see a doctor to sign off on paperwork for it till September.
Ouch.
Till September.
Ouch.
Yeah, shame
but they'll back pay
that.
her, right?
They'll back pay her, but the problem is that given a long enough absence, there's a possibility they may just let her go.
Canada, we're protected on that. It sucks because you have to wait 2 weeks before they'll start benefits, unless your private insurance covers it. And if you have private insurance that covers short-term disability, then the government won't give you shit, but usually your short-term will be a lot better. But what they do is basically they treat you like you're unemployed. So you have to go like you're unemployed. You have to do your benefits like employed. You get 55% roughly of your salary.
In Washington State, where we moved from, that is exactly what happened last time she went on leave. Washington has its own leave programs and stuff. And that's one of my biggest gripes about, and this may sound anti-patriotic or whatever, the U.S. is that it's so different state to state that you're just like, all right.
Unfortunately, that was kind of the point.
I get it, but
we federalized it in Canada. Like each province has its own welfare rules and stuff like that, and disability rules. But for loss of work, it's a federal thing. Yeah. It's called HRDC Canada. Human Resources and Development Canada. And basically it sucks. It's not a good system, and it's very much like anything run on a national level in this country. It's a bad system. It actually gives me lots of ample opportunity for game design for settings to go, this is why barons and dukes and lords exist, because they're going to exert their own stuff in their own territories, and anything done on a crown level is going to be garbage, and we'll make sure that's like a
bring it back to gaming.
Why not, man? I mean, listen, I can talk politics, but nobody likes talking politics.
Well, and the bad part is the last time we went through this, it was seamless and it was not a big deal. And to complicate things, and I don't know why I drew out complicated in that way. I think I was starting with compound, but changed words. You ever do that? Start with a word and change mid-word? But to
create a whole new word.
Things, her current supervisor at work is just shit. And so, which is bad because, I mean, she and I work for the same company. We just work in different departments. Mm-hmm. And her experience with her supervisor is one that I've never had in 16 years with the company. It's taken him a month to just get her an answer on whether or not she's fired or not. And she's still waiting. She's still waiting. And he's like, oh, I'll talk to HR about it. So finally, I had one of my friends in my department look up, because while she's on leave, she's locked out of her system, her work system. So she can't even go in and look up resources for work. So I had one of my friends do an end run, go check her profile out and find her HR contact. But anyways, that's the neither here nor there. I mean, that's just, kind of the why I'm working so much OT.
Yeah.
Because normally my stance on overtime is that's a company problem, not mine. And I will never work mandatory overtime. I don't even believe in it. It's like, you want me, if you're going to come in and tell me I have to work overtime, no. That's a human resources issue. That's a you problem, not a me problem. But if it benefits me, I will certainly work it.
The problem with doing OT in Canada, especially in Quebec, is that the tax rate is so high that it shifts you into a tax bracket. Because the way they calculate your taxes on a check here, I don't know how you guys do it in the States, because you guys have the weirdest tax laws I've ever seen. But how they calculate your deductions is they take the current check and then decide that's how much you're making every pay period for the year. So if you have a check where you have extra hours or extra money on it, they then calculate your tax rate as if that's how much you were making every check for the whole goddamn year. So you lose a ton of. Now you get it back when you file your taxes the next year, but you lose it in the short term, which is why most of us do OT. Is we want immediate money.
Yeah, I'm more. I don't. I'm worried actually that if I work too much, I'll get bumped into the next bracket. But I don't think I
Yeah, you
make
guys
that
have a
much.
strange system. Yeah,
We have an incomprehensible system. I mean,
yeah, no, it's literally Byzantine. It's amazing.
It's so hilarious because I see comments online like, "Oh, taxes are hard," and people are like, "Well, just read the instructions." I'm like, "Okay, yeah, sure."
Yeah.
I was like, "Okay, here, I'll learn tax law by reading the instructions on the tax sheet. I'll figure out taxes. Here's a copy of OD&D. You figure it out just by reading it."
Yeah, exactly. Good luck.
Just bring it back to gaming again. So, anyways,
I don't ever try to figure taxes out.
we've gone down to one person watching. Clearly, politics is not and hardship is not what anybody wanted to listen to. But
boo! You can learn how to make world building and domain management from this stuff.
Well, that's actually an excellent point. I mean, and I've said it before. We kind of touched on it in the Call of Cthulhu Adventure Design by Committee thing. Anything is fair game for game design and world design and adventure design. The simplest, most mundane thing, taxes, benefits, whatever, can only, I mean, they can all be turned into something interesting and important for your game, even if it's just background stuff. Like you're saying, why is it that the baronies are such a wild west sort of frontier place? Because they don't respect the king because all of his laws are shit,
Yeah.
But it's
I'm having fun with that. I'm actually doing work on my world while I'm on hibernation mode, and I just recently was screwing around with Midjourney to try and do some NPC portraits. That way, when I can afford art, I can always just go here. This is what they look like. Enjoy. And every now and then, Midjourney will just produce something that is nothing like what you asked it to produce.
Oh yeah,
but it can be really inspirational, and you wind up going down rabbit holes that just take you into the weirdest places. So it's been really helping my creativity, and some stuff I would never have thought to design for the world I'm designing because of those events. Right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's really fun stuff. So
Midjourney, I think, is as much crap as it gets, and duly so. I mean, AI art is evil, but
I disagree, and I'll tell you why I disagree. It's a tool like any other. I would never buy something using AI art as a produced resource. But for me, whenever I publish, one of the biggest problems I have is a waste of time and money on the pathfinding with the artist. I want the character to look like this. Well, here's 5 sketches of what I think the character looks like, right?
Where I was going with that is it is a useful tool, and it's great for just hobbyists too, where we, maybe we don't have art skills, but we certainly know what we're talking about, and we can, now have a computer generate it. My problem is, of course, that like any technological scientific development, it's going to have a double edge.
Of course.
And so we're going to see artists losing work. I mean, freaking the SAG-AFTRA thing that's going on right now. I mean, part of that is AI.
Part of that's AI. Okay, so I'm someone who's been a member of ACTRA, the Canadian division of all that fun stuff, and I've worked in the industry and I've worked in the field, and I sympathize with the writers. I don't sympathize so much with the actors, and I'll tell you why. Because we as Canadians got screwed out of the deal on residuals. What they do is, on any film we work on, American film, they give us what's called a buyout, so they don't have to pay us residuals. So let's say if you got a really, really good deal on a film, they'll pay you 200% buyout, right? So whatever they paid you to work on the film, you'll get another 200% of that as a single check at the end of production, so you never come back for royalties. Usually it's 125 or something like that. They try and lowball. I've seen ones that have lowballed as low as 50% buyout, right? That's how we live. So we don't get those checks between projects that keep us alive and allow us to be, the working actor like they do in Hollywood. Hollywood, if you work on one film or if you work on a TV series, a lot of those guys from the 80s who, Charles in Charge or whatever, Silver Spoons or whatever series they were on as a player, but they did, multiple episodes, they're making a living wage on residual checks from that.
Oh yeah.
That's nice. And if you can pull it off, I recommend it highly. But it kills your hustle.
from what I understand, also is part of it though is that streaming has changed how residuals are getting paid out. But
Yeah.
also there is some movement to try to reuse background performers through
Oh, yeah,
AI.
yeah. Dude,
Yeah.
there's tons of shit they're pulling, and it's
Yeah.
all garbage, and it needs to stop. But here's the thing: this is nothing new.
Oh yeah.
Producers have been, pardon my French, I don't know what kind of language I can get away with here on your channel compared
I
to
don't care.
mine, but they've been See You Next Tuesdays since the seven Warner Brothers started way back in the day.
Oh yeah.
They underreport earnings on films. They overreport expenses so that they don't have to pay shit to people if they can get away. Literally, if they can get away with paying
That
you
they can also wiggle
$0,
into tax write-offs for losses and all of that. Yeah. No, I guess it's worth saying now that you mention it. I mean, really, here the only rules I have is don't be a dick, and
shit.
if there's being a dick and then there's being a dick.
No, there's being a dick and then there's being an asshole. Didn't you see Team America World Police?
No, I don't like.
Oh,
I didn't like it. No.
they break it down
I
very
didn't see that.
succinctly. The differences between dicks, assholes, and pussies. And I'm telling you, it was like watching my religion unfold on the screen in front of me.
Yeah, there. I mean, there are a few topics that I tend to avoid.
Like what? Like what?
No, we're not going to go there.
Well, okay,
that's
but
not
then
avoiding
I'm
them.
if I trip into one, if I trip into one, you have no one to blame but yourself.
Let me just say let's keep the socio-political tapestry of today out of it.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, you're talking about the movie industry, but it sounded like we were still talking about politics.
Well, it's because it's all tied together.
Yeah,
exactly.
I mean, business,
It's
politics. I mean, do you know America?
You can't outact me, boy. Don't even try. Thank you, Sean. I appreciate that.
But yeah, it's so yeah. I mean, game wise, let's see. What have you two been up to? You mentioned you were world building, Bear, in your.
And I'm back on designing Bastard Sword again after putting it down for 3 months. So yeah, lucky me.
What about you, Logan?
Right now, I'm currently writing some character backgrounds for my players. I got one more to do so we can do our session 1 tomorrow night for our Ravagers of Carnage on my YouTube channel. So
cool.
That's what I'm doing today, and making. We're going to be talking about Hawk the Slayer on Bear's favorite movie of all time, but we're going to be talking about that on Fridays. So I got to put together a little video to see how much I can use and not use of that. It looks like it's pretty much fair game, but we'll see.
Yeah, I have been tinkering with a game that I have been tinkering with on and off for about a decade now, and every time I get into it, I get really excited to go work on it some more, and then as soon as I wade in, I just realize how little I know about game design, and it just tasks me. And so I find myself like pulling every set of rules off my shelf. How do these guys do it? How do these guys do it? How do these guys do it? And
then do another workshop. That last one you did was really cool.
Well, the problem is that I'd like to hopefully release this one as an actual published set of rules with an associated line of miniatures. So I kind of have to keep it pretty much under wraps in case I get scooped on it, you know.
Oh, I get you.
Scoop.
But
what was my favorite movie there, Logan?
Hawk the Slayer.
Hawk the Slayer. I know you didn't like it. You mentioned it.
No. Okay, man.
I love
that.
Learn
movie. How to interpret the words that come out of my mouth.
Yeah, I'm learning.
I don't play this. I'm anti-semantic. Okay. I say the words I mean. I never mean something else. I choose the words carefully. I have never said I hate Hawk the Slayer.
No, you didn't.
I don't understand the popularity of it. I don't understand why people like it, but I absolutely adore it for its cheesiness and insanity.
Well, there you go.
That's why people like
Rift
it.
Tracks. The Rift Tracks version of it is amazing.
So for me, as a person who watches that movie at least once a year, I love it because it is cheesy, because it's over the top. There's also a certain nostalgia hit that I get from it because it was really popular with me and my friends when we were kids. We would run around and pretend to be the characters, when it came out. So it's a memory. It's definitely, but also it's probably one of the better film interpretations of an actual D&D party.
That's what I like about it.
Yeah, I give it that.
A lot of movies are one hero and like, his sidekick or some background characters, whereas Hawk the Slayer, while it does have a one hero guy, everybody in that party has something to bring to it, and it's still, to me, to this day, a good example of an adventuring party. Even though they don't meet in a bar, they get summoned together by a witch. But it's still,
summoned is an interesting term for what happens.
Well, I mean,
teleported into the Spencer's Gifts rings is more like it, but sure.
that is true. But I mean, effectively, it's an alternative start to a campaign or an adventure. I've always liked it. It's not great. I guess though, I did catch a blurb the other day that it's possibly responsible for kicking off the fantasy movie rush of the 80s. So it does have some historical value.
Well, yeah, you're right. It came out just a little bit early.
Hey, Cody, what's up, man? Maybe his laptop is not allowing him to sprek. Hopefully.
Cody is on the laptop of doom.
Yeah, he was saying he was on his jalopy of a laptop, and
yeah. All right,
there,
Hawk
Cody?
the Slayer. What year? Let's see. Hawk.
It was 80. I just looked it up yesterday.
Conan, yeah, it's pre-Conan.
It was pre-Excalibur too.
Yeah.
I always thought Excalibur was the first one, but no, it was Hawk the Slayer.
No, Bashki's Lord of the Rings was 78. So,
well, yes,
but yeah, I think Hawk the Slayer sort of it kicks off this pretty continuous run of live action fantasy.
Right.
Here's a weird thing. Here's a weird thing. I had never heard of Hawk the Slayer until I moved to Vancouver in the 90s, and then everybody knew it.
It's all my fault for spreading it up and down
the
Northwest. Yeah.
It was a guy from England named Piers. But the point is that I think it's one of those things where it was more of a West Coast or maybe a Midwest to West Coast type thing. Because I'm telling you, on the East, nobody knew about this bloody thing at all.
Yeah, well, here on the West Coast, we still play in the woods. So
true. I know. I used to LARP out there.
Yeah. Oh God, man, I remember. Speaking of LARP, there used to be this big grand thing in my neck of the woods that I never got to. It looks like we lost Cody.
Yeah.
Oh, bummer.
LARPing woods, big thing.
No, but so there was a thing called I think it was called Omega or something like that back in the 80s, and I remember picking up an issue of Dragon and finding out that this thing was right there on the Olympic Peninsula, and I'm like, holy crap. And I never was able to get there, but it was this totally involved, like, over the whole weekend built up LARP experience that they did out on the peninsula, where they had a village built, and you would have people playing monsters in the out in the woods, and and the guy, the author of the article, was writing about his experience. He went out to this thing, and of course you get there, and you get your bag full of coins, and you pick your class, and maybe it was Nero. Nero is what it was, not Omega. Nero is what it was. And so you get your class, and like you would wear this little flip card thing on your belt that was your hit points. So you, like, as you got damaged in a fight, you would flip over to show how many hit points you had left, and they were chucking spells around with bags of different colored chalk and stuff. But what struck me as really cool about it is, he goes there. There's an inn. He gets a room at the inn. He's staying there, and then in the middle of the night, the undead lord and his minions attack the village. I'm like, there's an event, an encounter, and then, like, because all day he spends tromping around the woods fighting goblins, looking for the dragon's horde, things like that. But at night, when everything's settled down, suddenly the coordinators of the event are like, but there's an attack by the necromancer, and I'm like, that was just like reading that, back in high school. I'm like, oh man, because I'd been in the SCA and stuff like this is like SCA plus.
Yeah, it's still going on apparently.
Oh, cool.
Since 1989, North America's premier live-action role-playing organization, Nero.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
I-
89 would have been the year I graduated high school. So
At that
Yeah.
age, I was still hung up on the I have to be cool factor, and I didn't get over that till I was in my mid-20s.
I never had that. I was.
I
always
never
an
stopped
awkward
being
turtle.
cool. I got it right.
Well, yeah,
the
I
first
didn't
time.
stop being cool either, Bear, but I realized what was cool instead of what everybody else thought was cool.
See, you lose on that one, Logan, because I said it first, and then you just sound like you're copying me. I win.
No, I'm not
Yay.
copying you.
I win. I'm the best.
I
No.
embraced
You
my
can have the
awkward
last word on that
turtleness.
one, Bear.
I made my entire existence as a teenager and an adult of being someone who doesn't pick a side and doesn't pick a group. I hang out with whoever I like, and I don't care what social scenes they're in or what they qualify as.
Yeah,
It's not important to me.
it's always been me too. Even in high school, like I had jock friends and rocker friends and
Yep.
goth friends, and all one of the goths that was at my school.
The loneliest god.
Well, so where I went to school, there were not enough of any of these small groups, punks, goths. They just were referred to as the progressives, as this little creche of misfits, and they used to hang out in this old boiler room under the old building of the school that they called hell, and it was just there, like I said, there was like one goth and one hardcore punk. And then maybe a couple of drama kids in that group. But having the mystical art of drawing in my back pocket made me friends with a lot of people, because you'd sit in class and you're drawing something and, oh, that's really cool, can you draw me something? Draw one transformer for some football player, and suddenly you're his buddy, right?
Yeah.
So it always reminds me of that scene from Black Hawk Down. I have a very strange and special skill. I can type. But
it reminds me of from Some Kind of Wonderful, when Eric Stoltz is in detention with Elias Koteas as the skinhead goon, and he's drawing the picture of Jennifer Jason Leigh. Meanwhile, Elias Koteas is carving a picture of a skull woman into the desk. Like, that scene forever will always sit in my head of, that's what high school was for me too. Talk to anyone, hang out with anyone.
I had a 6th period German language class. The worst time to try and teach anybody a foreign language, because everybody is trying to get out of school, right? So it was full of all the ne'er-do-wells. And I was just bored out of my skull because it was year 1 German. Well, my dad is German, so I had I had the basics, I still screwed up in that class because I didn't know. I thought I had the basics, but I didn't know. Obviously, I don't need to learn this. Yeah, well, conjugate your way out of a paper bag, right? And so I would sit there and I started drawing murals on my desk, like a big, like all whatever anime I was into at the time, or Thundercats, whatever. And then every day I'd come into class and I would move the desk I had drawn on the day previously back one, and then take the next desk and start on it. By the time the teacher caught on, I was like 6 desks in, and the class was treating them like they were like some sort of sacred mural art. And she's like, "You have to clean these up." And they're like, "No, don't." I'm like, so yeah, it's kind of fun.
And that was the day of the revolution.
When
the overlord went against the artists, and it caused the uprising in the barony.
I was not. I hope. I like to think I wasn't responsible for this, because I was not the most awful in that class. The last day of school, I've never seen a teacher break down into tears and swear vengeance on a class. And this woman, just her mascara is just going down her face. And she's like, "If any of you come back for 2nd year, I'll remember." And we're like, So I came back for 2nd year. And she was gone.
Oh,
wow. Was she actually German, or was she just someone who taught German?
She taught German. She was not German. She was this very short lady with black hair in a bob, always immaculate makeup, always well put together. She was not primarily a German teacher. She was primarily a Spanish teacher who also spoke German. But that 6th period class was just horrible.
Wow.
I swear that 6th period class is the class that's in the startup of the one Van Halen song, Hot for Teacher. That was my class. I mean, the last day of school, I mean, kids are drinking in class. This is the 80s. But this poor lady just had a stroke of bad luck. She used to order films. Yeah, remember reel-to-reel films, right?
Oh, yeah.
And she would order from this catalog to find German language films to show us.
That's dangerous.
Oh yeah, and it went about where you would expect. So she comes in. I was gone this day from school, so I'm kind of sad I missed it, but I got to hear the story. Evidently, she had accidentally ordered a porn, put it on the reel-to-reel, and gone into the back of the class to grade papers while the film was going. Well, the film starts very, very normal. It's a man and a woman sitting down for dinner, and she was thinking she was going to get a nice conversational, situational video about two people having dinner, right? Educational, right? Until she didn't realize that stuff was starting to happen on the screen, and I guess the kids were just snickering and laughing and trying to keep it quiet to see how far it would go before she noticed. She was evidently just absolutely mortified to the point where she just flipped the projector off and then ran from the room. Poor lady.
Zum Teufel. There you go.
But yeah. So high school.
That wasn't my favorite.
High school was a treat.
But yeah, it's so game wise, I've been trying to crunch this system forever. I have a really cool idea in my head that I'd like to do. It's a miniatures game, not an RPG. But it exists in a space that hasn't really been done in its particular genre, which is a mecha combat game. But it's at a point in scale that I haven't seen. It's also so one of the biggest problems I see with mecha combat games, since BattleTech, right, is all mecha combat games are kind of fundamentally inspired by Japanese animation and the mecha genre from Japan, right? But they almost universally fail in their play to give that experience in play. So the thing that brings people, I really like watching all these mobile suits fly around and, do battle and everything like that. But then you sit down and play a game of that, and it's just number crunch after number crunch, just like any other war game. They usually don't have any of the style elements, or style beats, if you want to call it, that make, anime. And so, Jason figures as soon as I start talking mecha, you show up. Mechhead Studios. Jason is a major Gunpla guy, and but so yeah, what I'm trying to do is kind of make a game that has the feel of the thing that brings everybody to loving mecha in the first place. I mean, you get that in role-playing games that deal with mecha, or at least you did when people still made them. Like Mechton and things like that. But you don't see it on the tabletop a lot. It's BattleTech has become its own beast. And so it's but in doing so, I find that I'm not equipped completely to crunch a system from the ground up. So I've really been I've had to put a lot of work into it. Yeah, I can get into it. If you give me an existing system, I can modify and tweak that forever, right? But yeah, I'm struggling with the ground up stuff, but I'm still at it.
Well, it's easy to get lost in the weeds. That's one of the biggest problems I have. And you're always too close to your own work, so you don't see things that maybe, other people will see right away, which is really nice. That's why, pardon me, I like having a group of people look at my stuff and read my stuff that I trust their opinion and their feedback. Yeah. But at the end of the day, just have fun. If it's not fun, don't do it.
I do have folks that I can throw it out to, who I know I can who A, have experience in doing game design for war games, for miniatures of war games, who also know the genre. And so they can kind of look at it and go, wait, this is really cool. But like right now, like I'm piling through different systems trying to find how other systems have handled this one mechanic, this one idea, and none of them have. I'm like, okay, so should I just dump this idea? Because clearly like 5 other game systems have never even bothered. So is it worth it, or should I figure out a way,
Yeah.
That's the kind of thing that it's like, because that's the other thing. Like you're saying, you're so close to your own work. Sometimes you're just like, is this a thing that I should even be doing?
Yeah, I get that.
Well, yeah. Look, you're going to give up sometimes. It just happens.
Well, I said I've been working on this for a decade. I've given up many times and come back to it. So.
Oh yeah.
I think feedback is what I've been missing.
Yeah, and the problem I find with a lot of feedback too, especially when this is where the double-edged sword of you've got your close friends that you can trust and stuff like that, is a lot of times they don't give you the best feedback.
No.
Because they don't want to hurt your feelings, or they are also in love with your idea, or they're just in love with your creativity. That's the other. If you have really good supportive friends, they're very often just so happy that you're doing what you love that they don't want to be the one to knock a hole in that.
Question: where do you find these people, and are they available?
The people who love what you do.
Yes. Support you at every turn and just think it's awesome that you're creating. I think I know one person in my world like that. I need more of them.
One of them is my wife.
Damn it. I knew I made a mistake staying single.
We've been married 22 years. In fact, next month will be our 22nd anniversary. And we've been together for 23. And she is a gamer. Not a hardcore gamer like me. And I'm not even the hardest core of gamers. But she has been playing D&D since 2nd edition. So
that's always a plus.
Played it in high school. In fact, her DM married my ex-girlfriend. Her high school DM married my ex-girlfriend, and the two of them introduced us because we would have things in common. So D&D got me my wife.
Wow.
I can say the same thing.
But also, I'm very social online, and so I find a lot of like-minded folks. One guy he's never in the streams because he's busy. He has a small child, and he's married and a job, and his own game that he does. I've mentioned it on the stream though. The game Veritwood, and it's a miniatures game. Mike Cretchett is the guy who designed Solo Veritwood, and then he kind of play tested it with his community. Sort of an art house miniatures rule system. Started with a lot of just really evocative conversion of miniatures that created a setting, and then he built a game out of it. Anyways, he's somebody who's just, every time I post that I'm working on something, he's like, "Oh yeah, man, awesome! Tell me all about it." I'm like, "It's an idea I had while I was on the toilet, man, and we're not that far." he just wants to hear about it all.
That's good.
Yeah, but so you can find them out there.
I was being facetious, dude.
Oh, okay. Well,
I've got a fairly loyal cadre of people that I throw my ideas at, and they've been very good at supporting them. And I've also sort of, trained them in a way to be able to say, no, I don't like this, and here's why, as opposed to thinking they can't say anything negative, because that's the thing I hate the most about feedback, is when people just refuse to say anything bad. It's like, well, then why am I bothering talking to you? Because there's no way in hell you love every idea I have.
Yeah.
So maybe not do that and tell me what you really think,
Yeah. No,
you need to hear the good with the bad.
My comments are more for anybody who might be listening or watches this later on, who's looking to actually find those folks. I generally figure anything you're saying is with a certain degree of Gen X sarcasm and snark.
What?
We are of the same generation, sir. I am fluent in the Gen X.
I don't know what you're talking about. I completely don't know. You're madness, pure madness. Don't listen to him. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain.
Yeah, I mean, it just my gaming group from back in Washington. I've got a very good range of. I like your idea. I'm as ADHD as you are. Tell me all about it, and let's also talk about fishing, guns, and whatever else, all at the same time. I've got that all the way up to I am Mr. Statistics and Analytics. Let me bomb you with a spreadsheet based on the 2 sentences you've given me. That's the range I have for my old gaming group, and I appreciate it all. What was amazing was going to local conventions with these guys. As there used to be a game. Well, there still is a convention in the Vancouver, Washington, Portland area. It floats across the river based on where they can get a better hotel deal. Well, because Vancouver, Washington, and Portland are literally like across the bridge from one another.
The Snake River.
No, Columbia.
Columbia, that's right.
But neither here nor there. So we would road trip from up north of Seattle down to that area, spend the weekend gaming, and just a great convention. Just lovely local convention. It's big enough to be worth going, small enough to where you're still able to get into a game whenever you want. That perfect point of a convention. Conventions that are too small are often, what am I here for? What is there anything to do? And we all know that conventions that get too big are just ginormous, and you spend half your time in line to do stuff. The cool part about those trips was that we would grab a room, usually all 4 of us in one room with 2 beds, and we'd kind of shift what night somebody got to sleep on a bed, right? And or whoever snored the worst would get to sleep in the bed, so they wouldn't snore so bad. But the cool thing about those trips was all the talk and the inspiration for game ideas that we would have, and how we would just bounce them off all the way down, stuck in a car with guys for 4 or 5 hours on a drive, all the way back, every meal break, especially coming back from the convention. Your brain is just swimming in this experience, and you're just like, oh, I had this really cool idea, and we're going to do this. None of them ever came to anything, but just that creative soup that would come out of those experiences with that one gaming group. And they're still there. They're still my friends, even though I'm 1,000 miles away. I can still count on them and bounce ideas off from them. So
yeah,
we had a Justin sneak in and a Mar Hockman. Hello, sirs. Welcome. Let's see. What do we got? Anybody saying anything interesting? Yes, Jason, you are always upfront and honest, and I appreciate that. Your knowledge of all things mecha is very useful in the project too, so I appreciate it. Let's see. What you fail to realize is that we're immune to fire. We used to play with it as children on a regular basis, and therefore we have very thick, calloused hands, and we have faced the flames. So
we don't panic when fires start in the kitchen. We casually put them out.
Yep.
I remember as a kid, my brother my brother's 6 years younger than me, so I was he was like 4 or 5 at the time, and he got up in the middle of the night and was hungry and decided he wanted to cook himself hot dogs, because kids back then knew how to cook their own stuff, knew how to cook. He didn't know. He didn't know, but he thought he did. So my mom wakes up in the middle of the night to the smoke alarm going off. He has crawled up under the counter, turned on every burner on the stove, and decided to cook hot dogs on plastic coasters on the burners.
Oh.
Well, the funny thing is, talking about Gen X, because he's on the tail end of Gen X, being 6 years younger than me. 3 days later, he's like, "Mom, my foot hurts." And so my mother pulls off his sock, because he dresses himself at this point, and he had burned the entire top of his foot that night.
Wow.
and not made a peep. He just went back to bed and in
That's what I call a
the
high pain
panic of
tolerance.
everything, mom just like scooted us off to bed and dealt with the flames and stuff. And 3 days later, he's like, my foot hurts because it had gone a little nasty. But yeah, this is like you talk about being fireproof. I mean, I used to make explosives with my buddy and on the weekends or after school. His dad had a demolition license, and so we had free access to black powder and blasting caps and stuff like that. So
Yeah, we used to take bottles of Coffee Mate behind the swimming pool, the municipal swimming pool, and try and light it on fire to see how big a fireball we could make out of it,
Oh yeah. No, I don't think my brother qualifies as a millennial. But still, I think he's in that weird twilight zone between generations. Those where you're too old to be the next generation.
So basically what happens is the last edge of one generation starts exhibiting the traits of the next generation. Then about the middle of that generation, they've solidified what their traits are, and then the end picks up again. So early millennials have trends of Gen Xers, while late Gen Xers have trends of millennials. Center millennials are 100% millennial. They will never be anything else. And late millennials start to have Zoomer traits, and early Zoomers have millennial traits. And this is the way it all sort of works, right?
Yeah.
It's this crazy thing. So like my oldest sister
We
is
leapfrog.
10 years older than me. She's Gen X, but she's original Gen X, so she has some boomer traits in her that are just kind of like, and I mercilessly mock her for them. It's just fun to do.
Yeah, it's always weird to meet people who are on the leading edge of Gen X, because I'm like, dude, you're old.
Yeah. and you act like a boomer. What's that about?
The
you
worst
get upset about shit.
Worst experience. It was kind of embarrassing, awkward experience. So I back in my late high school, early 20s days, local game store in Washington, hanging out with very much a wide generation of players. Up to third marriage and on the cusp of a breakdown, all the way down to like other high schoolers like me. One guy in our group, really cool guy, Boeing worker and everything, so a decent amount of disposable cash. We're hanging out with him one night, and he's like, I got to stop off at my mom's and and check on her and stuff. So we come in there, and I see this old lady sitting on a chair. And I'm like, dude, is that your mom? He's like, no, that's my older sister. His older sister's like 20 years older than him.
Yeah.
And I'm like, and the bad part is his mom comes out of the back room, and it's like, I have this crypt keeper moment, because like she is just old. I'm like, oh my God. Because his sister looked like she could be his mom.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was kind of a weird, awkward moment. I'm like,
So my oldest sister is 10 years older than me, almost like 10 years and a month, because 9 years and 11 months, because her birthday is 1 month after mine, right? So every year for her birthday, I send her have you considered a new career as a bog witch circular? And constantly I'm encouraging her to just give into it and, just go live in a swamp and eat babies, and she'll be a much happier person, like.
Yeah. My older sister would take that as a compliment.
I'm scared now of your family.
But it's like I think one of the best. You can see a piece of cat fluff floating past the camera. She's asleep on this chair behind me somewhere. You can see her collar. But I also have a house panther bear.
Yes, they're the best.
She has a more comfortable office chair than I do.
Really?
Yeah, she's got a nice cushy pad on her office chair, and she comes down in here with me while I'm working. But yeah, like being, one of the best compliments my kid ever paid me indirectly was, when he had moved out with the significant other at the time, and his significant other is like, hey, how do you always, we're always broke and we have nothing really good to eat. How do you always manage to make good food? And he's like, my dad taught me. Because and I remember, I don't think I ever got taught how to cook food. I just picked it up along the way. And also because of being a latchkey kid, there was always coming home to that note, pork chops are in the fridge,
Yeah.
put a
Hot
can of,
dog, hot dogs defrosting in the sink.
but by the time I was 10, I was cooking roasts for dinner by myself, and I guess my mom did teach me, but there was never that sit down like, okay, honey, here's how you cut a carrot.
Yeah.
It was like, here's a carrot, cut these up.
So for me, what happened was my parents went away. I was probably 11 or 12. My parents went away to the Bahamas for 2 weeks, and my bog witch sister was left in charge of us. And after the third day of having pizza again for every goddamn meal, because she didn't know how to cook, so she just bought pizza and then we spared it out over the days, I said, screw this, and I started cooking, and I just learned how to cook and taught myself. This is what Gen X is about. It's about resourcefulness. It's about being people who just go, fuck it, I'm doing it. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
I'll learn.
It was weird going back to my so many. It's funny, your kids change you and shape you and educate you in a lot of ways that everyone's like, you teach your kids teach you too. And I remember having a conversation with I think it was my oldest and maybe my oldest and my youngest at the same time. They're 4 years apart, but one or both of them commenting to me that we made them freaks in their, among their peers because we raised them to be like independent and resourceful.
Yeah.
Because we've always lived for the betterment of the kids. We've always lived in areas above kind of our income, just to make sure they can go to decent schools and stuff like that. But that also meant that my kids were often running into kids in a different income bracket, and just general suburbia kind of bracket, right? High end suburbia.
Yeah.
And so these kids weren't allowed to do anything. These other kids, and they couldn't do anything. Like they'd come over for a birthday party, and you'd be like, here's a bunch of, you'd hand them a stack of stuff and say, take this out, and they'd be like, what, how do I it's a stack of plates, take to table, and weird basic instruction stuff. But it was just so weird because my kids felt like they just didn't fit in because we always let them, my wife and I kind of just we raised them the way that we were raised, and because we thought it was easier to do than it was for our parents. I'm like, my kids had cell phones, at a certain age, I'm like, literally I can track you and you can call me anytime, go into town and have fun, go down to the beach, have fun,
Go away.
Well, just experience.
That was my mother's system. Her literal line was, I'll give you a quarter if you go play in traffic.
Just experience life is the whole thing. My kid would be like, Dad, Dad, we're gonna ride our bikes down to the beach. All right, cool, don't drown.
Yeah.
When they were younger, we were living in an apartment before we moved into a rental house for the longest time. They were always in the little green belt attached to the apartment, building forts and stuff like that, and doing the stuff that I grew up doing, damming creeks and all of that stuff, right? Wouldn't do it nowadays because I realize I probably wreaked havoc on the salmon migrations, but potentially. But
salmon are resourceful.
Well, I remember when I was a kid, we lived in a neighborhood with all these backyard creeks, and they were all salmon migration points.
Yeah.
It was kind of cool. In fact, my 6th grade class, we went down to the University of Washington, their fisheries department, got a clutch of eggs, fertilized eggs, took them back to class where we had built this big tank and hatched out salmon hatchlings and fries, and then took them to one of the local streams and released them. It was kind of a cool project. So,
very cool.
Washington takes it seriously, or at least it did.
Oh yeah, trust me. Yeah, I lived in the Pacific Northwest. I remember how seriously.
Don't fuck with their fish.
Also, where I grew up in eastern Quebec, there's the Bonaventure and the Grand Cascapedia rivers, and they're very much Atlantic salmon vital lines for rivers. So not only did I grow up around, like one of my cousins has a salmon fishing retreat, like where like Ralph Lauren is one of his clients and stuff like that. Like it's a big deal. The natives also down home, the First Nations guys, the Micmac, they were huge on salmon. And one of my sisters used to date a native guy named Claude. And every time he'd come visit my mother about once a month when he'd come to see Kim, he'd always bring her a fresh salmon. Like, here you go, like just polite, like the old days when you brought something to the house of the girl you were going to date,
Oh yeah. I'm growing up, all the adult men in my life were at least seasonal fishermen.
Yeah.
Even if it wasn't their full-time job, a lot of times, during one of the whatever season, they would go off to the ships because they'd come back with a pocket full of cash for the family, right? Back when we still had, fish reserves. So my biological father was a full-time fisherman in the Pacific for the longest time. And he eventually got out because he just wasn't able to catch anything anymore. It's like,
yeah.
And he fished for everything. I mean, he wasn't like a one guy kind of, during certain seasons he was lobstering, during certain seasons he was crabbing, during certain seasons he was, cod. He just followed whatever was in season at the time, and he still couldn't make a buck. So he cashed out.
Well, yeah, that's kind of the story of the part of Quebec I grew up in, which is basically the fishermen, trying to survive as best they can. And having to deal with, well, shit doesn't work out the way you always think it's gonna sometimes, and that's the sad part of life.
Yeah.
So we went from cod to salmon to crab. They did the whole run as well. It's just the way it is. And now there's nothing, and now it's all tourism and overpriced.
Well, it's thanks to guys like my dad who literally sat across the table from me and said, "Oh, son, there's plenty of trees, there's plenty of fish, blah 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 blah." I'm like, dude, no.
I think in San Bernardino, where I really grew up in my teenage years, they were trying to get rid of all the wildlife.
Just get rid of it. Just burn it.
Just get rid of it. Yeah, it was hard to find
immediately. Yeah, I hear you.
Unless you went into the mountains or something, but pretty much in the city, that we had cats, yeah, and dogs.
Yeah, it's But anyways, that kind of adventuresome lifestyle as a child was very good for also like kind of that resourcefulness. I think it made us better gamers. Because it is kind of a chicken and the egg too. Because gaming made us more resourceful too.
Yep.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's I don't know. I also remember asking my kids, "Hey, why don't you guys go out and just hang out places more often?" And my kid looked me dead in the eye and says, "Where?"
This is true.
It's like they won't let us. We can't go anywhere. And it was this thing. He's like, because my kids, while they do like video games, they were never like glued to like their computers and stuff like that. I mean, they kind of developed that way. One of them did over time, but he also has some physical injury issues and stuff that kind of limit his mobility these days. But they were really hard pressed to find places they could just hang out. Like when I was a kid, you just go hang out in a parking lot somewhere or a vacant lot.
Yeah. Jesus, yeah.
Or the
someone would break into the rink. We'd go into the fence or over the wall into the rink and hang out on the ice-free summer rink. It was,
everything is no skating, skate proofed. Don't don't loiter.
Well, I could explain why that is, but I won't start a culture war here because people seem to want to hate the culture war idea that we're living in. So I won't say anything other than times change, people change, attitudes change.
That's true.
Probably always been like that.
Yeah,
dude. Think about the playground gym equipment when you were a kid, and go look up some pictures of it if you're old enough like me.
Oh yeah,
this shit was designed to kill us.
That's just true.
I tried to do a backwards, flip on one of the little uneven bars that were out on the playground once. Head straight into the concrete. Boom.
Oh yeah.
I don't think I've seen monkey bars for years.
We had a giant metal slide that in the summer would heat up to surface of the sun temperatures. And
I remember when my grade school put one of those in. They went all the way down this hill that led down to the playground. And we all sat there for one whole year watching this thing get built. And then, of course, they would put that weird whatever mercury coating or whatever they put on it that that had to sit there for a while and you couldn't touch it. They're like literally are like, don't touch this, you'll die. And then when it finally came out there, so many kids got hurt because they'd go down on their jackets so they get super speed, right? Launch themselves onto the concrete.
I miss the merry-go-round. I used to spend a lot of time on it as a kid, which probably explains a lot.
But yeah, I mean, the fact of the matter is,
where you would spin it as hard as possible and get like the biggest guys, the strongest guys to get it, and then see who could hold on
or jump off,
before they went shooting off into the sand or the field or a building. Who cares?
Yeah, the big flex was when you could sit in the middle and just sit there on your cross-legged and not move.
But that was the secret. If you understood how centrifuge worked, the closer you were to the center, the less G-force upon you, you were good. But on the edge, your feet were flying out. You were going to go sailing, man.
Yeah. But I wouldn't say that those things were better back then because they clearly were broken. No,
it was eugenics. It was completely eugenics to breed the strongest kids possible and kill off the weak ones, obviously.
It's I mean, I remember going to a junior high that actually had a student smoking section.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. That I'm sure that didn't last long, but yeah, I in fact, it was such an oddity even at my time that I got there. I'm like, what?
Yeah, our rule was off grounds. If we were one step off the property, do what you want because it's not the school's property, and that's the way it is. So we all smoked just on the other side of the fence type of thing.
Yeah, I never did smoke, but I had friends who did, and it was like just so weird. Weird for me to like, what? The school allows it? And the whole idea was that they'd rather keep the kids on campus instead of having them wander off. And there's certain, I can understand the psychology there. I mean, if they're there, they're probably going to go back to class. Right.
So I'm not going to name names because I never know who's listening to this, but there was one teacher we had in junior high who was a bit of a, we'll call him a nicely fine way of saying he was an anus. He was a complete anus. And his favorite game in the world was, I'm going to tell your parents. And I won't say which student it was. It wasn't me. It was a friend of mine. We were all there was a restaurant near our school where we'd go for lunch because they didn't have a cafeteria program. So we'd have to go either bring our lunch or go to this little restaurant and have lunch. So the place was at lunch. It was always packed with students. And in those days, you could smoke inside. So we'd sit and smoke at the table while we ate our lunch and what have you. And he came in and he walked up to one of the students and he said, I'm going to be telling your mother I saw you smoking. And my buddy looked up at him, took a drag, and went, well, I guess I should be telling your wife about what I saw you doing last night down at the inn. And the guy's face went white as a sheet, and he just spun on one heel and walked out. And this is what you get when you live in small towns. Everybody knows your business. But to think about it, for us in Gen X, the balls that he showed to say that to an authority figure, we were like, oh, today, God, I watched some of these videos what these teachers go through, and I'm like, I'm glad I never got into teaching kids.
At the same time, though, the teachers back then often didn't take any shit either. I remember not at the school I went to, but in the old neighborhood where I had moved from when my friends got into high school, they had a teacher who broke a clipboard over some student's head.
Oh, wow. Yeah. I legit got into a fist fight with a teacher in grade 8. Yeah. Like in the hall, we just went at each other. It was brutal.
There was another teacher who who in his classroom had a paddle board on his wall that said, "Don't fuck with the master." And and then the kids stole it. So he came back with one that was made of metal instead of wood. And but
we had a strap. We still had the strap when I was in junior high.
Yeah, I got spanked in grade school in front of the class. My first grade teacher hauled me up there and went to town on me, and my mom showed up and threatened to kick her ass. Yeah, he's like, "You touch my kid again." My mom did not like this teacher. This teacher, because what I didn't know back then that I now know is that I was dyslexic and ADHD at the same time.
Uh-huh.
And so back then in 1970, do the math, you know, that just meant you were the sensitive, undisciplined, spastic kid, right?
Yeah.
You know, who was dumb, right? At least if you had a teacher who wasn't worth a shit, and she wasn't. So she had, at one point, like as a lot of ADHD, people, adults and kids, I did not have a tidy space, so
Yeah.
my desk was always cluttered, and she would like to point out to the rest of the class, well, Eli's gonna be a garbage man when he grows up because he's always a mess, and
shame-based teaching.
oh yeah, my mother just had it in for, because my mom and I we were always on good terms. My mom was a recovering hippie, and so was all about the open communication between her. You feel your feels. Talk to me. I love you. Be you, right? And so I would come home, Mom, this teacher. So when this teacher dared lay hands on me, Mom was just up there in no time. It was awesome. But of course, that was also back when a kindergartner could walk to school on his own with only the sixth grader next door with him.
Yeah, different times.
Oh yeah,
very good. Yeah. Just make sure you're home by the time supper's on.
This has been a very odd stream. I know for those. We have 8 people watching, so thank you for all the people who are sticking around. Like Squirrel's here, Squirrel Hermit's here, Daniel Kearney showed up. So, I mean, for all you folks who are in here listening to Generation Talk,
welcome to Our Generation Was Homicidal.
What I don't like,
and
you mentioned sort of the culture war thing. I mean, I really do not buy into the whole, Gen X was so great and we're so amazing and we're all bulletproof, blah, 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 that you often see flexed on social media. Because the fact of the matter is we were all broken as shit too.
And there were complete twats in our day, and we had people who clearly, don't forget, today's modern day Karen, that stereotype, if you look at her age, she's Gen X.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, the thing is, a lot of us, myself included, we were shaped by the trauma of our childhoods.
Absolutely.
And so while it made us resourceful and it made us resilient and adaptive, those are also all strategies that are consistent with people with trauma.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
We were alone and scared a good chunk of the time. We just would never admit it, and we didn't feel scared. But deep down, there's probably a good part of us that was not comfortable.
Well,
we had to put on that face.
Not to get into therapy here. I had a narcissistic, absent father who was gone most of the time, and an alcoholic, abusive mother. I was adopted. I was dyslexic. Apparently, I was left-handed, and they rulered my hand until I learned to write with my right hand.
Jeez.
And I still can't write for shit with a pen. And I was creative and angry, and I fought a lot, and I got into fights, and I beat. It wasn't until I became an adult that I learned how to figure my shit out.
Yeah, I went through a phase where I was starting fights. We moved around a lot when I was a kid. I think I did the math once. I never spent more than 3 years in one school, and that was the long stretch. And my parents always had the habit of moving me at the worst time. Middle of 7th grade, middle of 9th grade, I moved away from all my friends, right at the start of each of those big school jumps. So I came into 7th grade and I was, hitting puberty, and I was bigger than a lot of people, and I was really alone and awkward and weird. And so, hey, guess what? Fists talk. And, so yeah, I went through that phase. Yeah. But as an adult, I don't think I've ever actually been in a fight. I've managed to not be in fights. Anyways, yeah, 8 people here listening to Generation Talk. But I know there's not a way to really spin that back to gaming necessarily, but yeah, I mean, we survived. We started playing games because we were creative nerds who needed an outlet. But yeah.
It all goes back to gaming, though. All of our life experiences make up what we do in game.
Oh yeah, and I just one of the biggest problems that like Bear pointed out, there's the culture war, whatever part of it you want to talk about, and and I'm not really going to get into it. I mean, I think you mentioned it earlier. Look, there's always been some aspect of that. It's just it is magnified by the accessibility of opinion nowadays. I'm sure at some point, generational gaps, culture wars, whatever. So at some point, some young caveman picked up a turtle shell and started beating on it, and his dad came out of a cave and went, what's up with all that stupid music? What's wrong with Hollow Log? Hollow Log was good enough for me and my dad, but what's with Turtle Shell?
You know what? I'm a Hollow Log Turtle Shell fusion kind of guy. I like when you take those and mix them together.
But I mean, if you think about it,
dude, Socrates. There's an actual quote from Socrates talking about the next generation being the doom of civilization.
Well, yeah, and Mozart himself was like the upstart for his time.
What a troublemaker!
What?
So what a troublemaker! Mozart was a complete rebel. He was a punk.
What is hilarious is, and nowadays he's like, oh, classic music. He's one of the greats, but at the time he was like the rock star punk.
Shakespeare was one step away from porn in his day.
Exactly. So there's always been that gap. The thing that just absolutely magnifies it to horrendous levels is just the availability of opinion.
Yeah.
Anybody can say anything and act and not have to face the consequences, and then be made to feel that they were correct.
Yeah. Well, it's here. This one's for Sean. You kids today with your hula hoops, your Zima, and your Dan Fogelberg records. Let's see if Sean gets that reference. Okay, so yeah, you're right. And so, okay, this is why I don't play the OSR, NSR edition war game, because it's literally the same thing as a bunch of people. The Beatles were good music. I don't know what this garbage is today. Oh, D&D is the best D&D. I don't know what this garbage is today. It's like they don't even see that they're doing it. That's the part I hate about it most. It's like, do you not see what you're doing? You're just doing what your parents used to do to you when you loved the Beatles.
Well, yeah, and I'm on record as saying, the flip side of that too, or not the flip side, but another part of that is that so many of those opinions are just objectively wrong. Like like D&D. Well, it's the whole D&D was this.
Yeah.
It's like, no, it wasn't. It was like that at your table. And D&D was never one thing, and that's the OSR groups. There's a lot of that. Another weird thing is, like, if you look at what gets published for the OSR, there's this idea that the OSR was way wackier than it was.
Oh, yeah.
Like all this weird, goofy, nonsensical, crazy adventure stuff that gets published. And I'm like, maybe that wasn't all that prevalent in the published works of the time, and none of the tables I played at were all that wackadoo. Yes,
we didn't dungeon crawl. I started playing in '85, and we didn't dungeon crawl. We were never dungeon crawlers.
And we did story-based characters,
yep.
and I dropped level limits for classes or for races because I thought it was dumb that an elf could live to be like 800 years old and like never be as good a wizard as a human.
Did that too.
Yeah.
But because I never got bogged down in like all the game balance issues that they were trying to work in with that kind of stuff back then too. And I always hated. To me, game balance was always a bad word.
Yeah, me too. It still is. With game balance, I can literally, at any point in time as the DM, say, twin bolts of green lightning streak down from the heavens, impaling your character because you angered the gods. Take 200 D10 worth of damage. Who gives a fuck about game balance?
Yeah, and even without flexing like that, though, I mean, the rules themselves are only balanced to a point because they cannot account for every combination of legitimate factors that are going to come up in the game, even without having to come up with crazy DM caveats.
No, I'm just saying, like, that's the thing. Yeah. Like the fact that we argue it's like the realism argument. Well, no, but realistically, blah blah. Yeah, you realize that guy wiggles his fingers and says booga booga, and fireballs shoot out of him, right? Like, can we get off the realism argument, please? As long as we're not breaking the physics of the world, maybe we need not to argue so much about, well, realistically, because it's exhausting. It's a pedant's argument.
Yeah, I always love I always love the arguments where they try to ascribe like realistic, like naturalistic angles towards monsters in D&D. I'm like, all right, your dragon can't fly anymore. Your dragon,
Wow.
your giant can't support his own weight. Those are my two go-to examples, because they're always like, well, this animal is clearly a reptile, and so I mean, is he? I'm pretty sure I didn't see any lizard men in my encyclopedia of reptiles. It's like that fantasy race can do just about anything. I mean, I'm not one of those like, it's fantasy, you can do whatever you want. I mean, you still have to have some internal consistency, but this idea that realism or nature factors into all, like is there. The one that got me recently with 5th edition was the whole screech over turtles having a short lifespan. And I call it a screech because it was really just, that's all I ever heard. They're turtles. They live really long. They should be the longest lived race. Or not.
Yeah, or not. They don't exist. They're not real.
Well, it's funny is I went so far as to write like an article / essay on it. And if you look at, even if we want to analyze it, if you want to, because you can just say because turtles, but if you want to look at it, fantasy races are always some sort of like there's some sort of aspect of humanity that is then magnified to some degree, right? Elves are pretty and magical because humans kind of want to be. Dwarves are resourceful and because humans kind of want to be.
Halflings are able to eat endlessly and not get fat because humans want to be.
Right.
But the other thing that you often see in folklore and mythology is the contradictory creature, where it is against its nature. The noble wolf, the friendly, whatever. And so I always looked at the turtles as that's the flex they were going for with that short lifespan. Is you would expect a turtle to be super long lived, but in this case we're going to make them short lived because that is just some fantasy distinction. Because fantasy distinctions on species, races, often are one extreme to the other. They either take away or build on something that humanity has as its core, but they also often exist in contrast to them, to the nature of themselves. And the funny thing is, those arguments completely wither away when you start talking about, okay, well, what about all the other animal-like races in the game that do things that natural animals can't do?
Like wear clothes.
Okay, so you want to play that rabbit person? The minute you encounter anything remotely frightening, you die of a heart attack.
Yeah, save versus death, because that shock may make your heart explode. Enjoy that. It's true. But this is human nature in general, Eli. I used to work with this native guy, First Nations guy, who was hilarious, man. This guy was just the best. And one day we were talking, and I'm like, dude, you're from Saskatchewan. I don't know anything about your tribe, your people. What's your totem animal? And he's like, oh, our totem animal is the prairie wolf. And I looked at him, I said, Clyde, why is there no one ever as a tribe that isn't some noble, majestic animal? It's never, our totem animal is the titmouse. It's never anything like that. It's always some massive predator or flying thing. He goes, yeah, that's a good point. And I said, look at humans. Humans always say, well, I'm the lone wolf, or me, I'm a bear, or whatever. We're not any of these things. As a species, we're an easily frightened primate that herds together for protection and safety in numbers. We're not wolves. We're not sharks. We're not eagles. We're none of these things. So for me, when it gets to these animal races, these animal-kin races in D&D, I don't like them. And the reason I don't like them. And the reason I don't like them, and it's not to shit on anybody, is it just feels like furries to me. It just feels like I want to be of this, and it's like, okay, we'll have fun with that, but I'm going to just stick to elves and dwarves and gnomes and halflings. You
Yes,
know?
yeah, I don't have that stigma that anything animal-like is
Right,
necessarily furry.
I never looked at it that way either. My
Yeah,
wife is really
'cause-
big into the animal men, and it gave me a different perspective on them. We always had a cat man in the game because of the Ricasta, but
Yeah, I mean,
when my
and-
wife
I'm a
joined
bitter
the game-
dick.
yeah, I mean, back in the 80s, like when the animal, the anthropomorphic animal craze came out, kind of in comics, that's where my roots are buried, with the TMNT and things like Albedo Anthropomorphics. Captain Carrot and the Zoo Crew, yes, but none of those were, and what's funny is like back then it wasn't like that's a furry thing. That was like that was just a badass animal character or a goofy animal character. There were a few that were made to be risque. There was Omaha, the cat dancer, in the adult section of the comic shop.
What was the Ronin rabbit?
Oh, it was Sagio Jimbo.
Yeah, Yosagi
Yeah.
There you go.
He first appeared in the pages of Albedo Anthropomorphics, which was a sort of a anthology magazine that featured the Irma Film, the EDF comic in it. Now these names are all Greek to folks, but Irma Film, the EDF, yes, the characters were all anthropomorphic animals, but it was some of the hardest sci-fi I've ever read.
Nah, dude, Fritz the cat.
Well, yeah, there's the other part of the spectrum, yes, but I'm just saying there was a lot of serious stuff, and so like I never grew up with that whole attitude of it's a pretty modern thing, honestly. I think with the whole that's some furry bullshit,
Listen, I'm obviously being extreme for shock value.
Yes.
Very good stuff. Obviously,
I'm not being down on you. It's just
No,
I
no,
run
no,
into
no,
that
I know,
anytime I
realize
present that stuff.
Eli.
Yeah.
Logan, let's make an agreement. We're not oversensitive. We're adults, and we can have conversations where we don't have to qualify that we're not attacking each other. Because I would not expect either of you to attack me at
Fair.
any point in time.
Fair.
I can agree to that. That's easy.
I don't want to have to put disclaimers on everything we say because that's just going to feel silly.
Yeah.
I see the point you guys are making about the appeal of the animal role playing. I get it. I understand it. It's just not for me.
Yep.
The reason it's not for me is exactly what I shouted out as I was grabbing a can of cherry Coca-Cola Zero, Captain Carrot and the Zoo Crew. It was always in my life cartoony. It was always Saturday morning shit. So by the time I was looking at stuff like Usagi and stuff like that, I was already in my late teens. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I was already I'm becoming an adult. So I had a much different take and it was a different beast. So I didn't get programmed at a young age to have that. I got programmed that it's kid shit. That's where
true.
I got it from, right? So that's why I'm not a fan of it in RPGs.
No, and I mean, I'm not down on you not liking it. I perhaps did flex a little defensively there, but
Yeah, it's okay.
because it's a thing that bugs me because I mean, honestly, it's one of those things that for me as a creative individual, there's a lot of negativity that gets thrown out on things that I create based on stupid, like very basic, almost meme-ish opinions.
Mhm.
And that's what I think, honestly, the furry thing is almost more of a meme opinion nowadays. Kind of like, being afraid of clowns. I think I mentioned this on another stream.
Ridiculous. I never got the clown thing.
Well, and the thing is, it's not. Most people say, I'm terrified of clowns. Oh, clowns are scary. No, they're not. You're not actually scared of clowns. It's just really cool and funny and goofy to say it. It's a meme.
Yeah.
I don't like clowns. It's not that I'm
I don't
scared of
like
them.
them.
I'm not saying there aren't people who legitimately don't like clowns, and we're not talking phobias because that's an irrational fear of things. But there's lots of people who I know who are like, I'm terrified of spiders. I'm like, really? Are you terrified of spiders? You exist around them all the time. I don't see you in a cold sweat every time you walk through the garden. But it's the same thing with the whole furry thing. It's like, and of course our experience is definitely color or position. I came up in my experience with my early experience is probably very similar to yours. I just came into contact with things like the TMNT and Black Belt Hamsters and preteen Dirty Jean Kung Fu Kangaroos and all of that early on, Samurai Cats, things like that. And then of course what really opened my mind to how serious it could be is what I mentioned with Irma Film, the EDF. that story has all of these wonderfully drawn animal characters in this hard sci-fi setting, and then as the story goes by, you find out why they're all there and why they're all animals. But at the heart of it, there's this hardcore science fiction story going on where the rabbits are trying to seed from the Republic to form their own, or from the Union to form their own republic, and they're they're resorting to terrorism, and these animals are blowing the shit out of each other. But the way it's written is not just like violence for violence sake. There's a story there, and it's all this deep politicking and social stuff. And it was a real weird flip during the 80s because the bad guys were the Republic and the good guys were sort of the weird socialist, union, but the tech in there was all really hardcore tech. One of the issues starts out with this multi-page panel just going through the steps of an invasion from orbit, and how first they do this and then this happens and blah 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 and just to get a couple of ships worth of troops to land at this spaceport and do an attack. And that was really cool. And of course, I'm going to spoil it for anybody who's not read the comic, but it's been out for 30 years. In the end, you find out that all these animals are out there because they were put out there by man to pave the way for man getting there. And that's why their society is all automated and it has all this AI backup and everything like that. Yeah. But we never got there.
No, that's interesting, and the point is that the portmanteau that you put on it is unless you're using it as the reasoning, it is ultimately irrelevant to the story you're going to be telling. Okay, yeah. And that's the beauty of it. So, Animal Farm was a lovely comment on society and capitalism and socialism and all the fun stuff that they were dealing with at the time that it was written, and that made a lot of sense. And it was good to use animals because it sort of lulled people into looking at it. Watership Down remains one of the most horrific films I saw as a child.
Oh yeah,
and what is it about? It's about fascism. You know what I mean? It's just telling you the story of fascism and the farmers who get caught in it. Things like that. That's good. If someone was playing that in a D&D game, I'd be down with it. But they all want to be fucking Puss in Boots. You understand? That's my fucking problem with it.
Well, what you need to do, Bear, is play Tales from the Wood.
I never saw the furry angle on that. To me, it was always just, oh, you want to play that? That's cool. You can play what you want. But as far as for furry, when they started taking on personas, that's when I was like, that's weird. For me at least.
Well, and that's it's like there was a lot of comics I read as a kid too that had animal characters, and
right.
So but anyways. That was the latest segment on our thing.
Next up on Old Men Yell at Clouds.
But no, it's and ultimately when it comes down to it, I'm never going to be down on people playing what they enjoy and not playing the things that they don't enjoy, because that's dumb. But
there's nothing wrong with that. But if I'm presenting you a serious D&D world or a campaign world that's very trad, vanilla type stuff, don't fucking start pitching me your weird furry fetish characters.
Oh yeah, that's completely different. I mean, that goes down to expectations for the setting and stuff. What I was saying is, like, honestly, I'm not going to ever fault anybody. Legitimately fault somebody. I might argue their point, but I'm never going to fault anybody for not liking something, or not preferring something, or for preferring or liking something, because that's just our flavor. That's just our taste.
Sure.
You and I were just talking about how we played D&D even in the old school very different than a lot of people talk about. Sean's over here wringing his fist at us.
Yeah, Sean, listen. Okay, so you guys need to understand something about Canadians. This is how we roll.
Oh no, Sean,
this is our thing. We kind of and
trust me, being the only American, U.S. American at a Vancouver, BC art school college party, was an experience.
Yeah, but also Lotus Land is not a good representation of the rest of Canada. I lived there for 8 years, trust me.
But I got to field every stupid Canadian question.
Well, look at it this way.
Why is it you Americans spend so much money on defense? And I just looked the guy square in the eye. I'm like, so you don't have to?
Exactly. Right? And yet we do. Don't worry. I can argue that one to them. What you have to worry about with Sean or any of us as Canadians is when we write you a sternly worded letter. That's when we're serious.
No.
When we take the time out of our day to write you, oh, now it's on. Now it's a hockey fight if we cross paths.
Yeah, it was always funny too, because like there's always one guy at one of those parties who wants to somehow prove that, like he wants to like speak American to me or something, like, hey, yo, I've fired guns too. I'm like, okay.
So let's break it down though. Let's look at our context clues. Vancouver Art School. Yeah. Okay. You know, this is a very specific section of Canadian.
I know. It was always interesting because I used to bus up there to visit some friends.
Yeah.
You know, and I'd go up there pretty frequently when I could, especially when there was like a birthday party or like a Halloween get together or something like that. And there was a girl involved, but
there was a girl involved.
But so back then, you know, it was just kind of funny because even in that weird little, because I mean, Vancouver is not all that different from, say, Seattle.
No,
you know, we're kind of in the same little bubble. You know, it's, but it was so funny to watch this, and this is probably just young people too, because we're all young and stupid. We're in our 20s, and there was always a group of them who were like super cool and like clearly just interested in being your friend, right?
Yeah.
And then there was always that group that just had to somehow decide that it was their job in that interaction to do the Canada versus America versus the US thing. I'm like, that's not what I'm here for, man. So I would come up with the most dismissive answers. That's why the whole like, so you don't have to, comment came from, because I'm like, I'm from Washington State, where we have enough military hardware there to like pretty much conquer the entirety of Canada. It's like,
but think about it this way. This was one of the best things I ever learned. When I was in college, one of my buddies was doing journalism as a course, broadcast journalism, while I was studying radio.
Yeah.
And he got to interview the guys from 5440, which is a Canadian band. And basically they were talking about the Canadian content rules and laws that the government had put in place on music and broadcast and all this kind of thing. And he asked him, what are your thoughts on that? And the guy's answer was absolutely fucking amazing. So remember, this is pre-internet, right? This is 91, 92. And he says, so we have a situation here that is not exactly unique in the world. We have two countries side by side that speak the same language, ultimately share a culture. One has a much larger media presence and population than the other. And exactly how much can you tell me about Austria? And it was just like such a bam point, right? Which is for Canadians, and I understand, I don't forgive them for what they were doing to you, but I understand why some Canadians do it, is because we spend a lot of time being the brunt of your jokes. We spend a lot of time being the kicking boy of North America. So some people take that personally. I don't. I just correct you or move on, or I say my favorite one ever, which is, motherfucker, we are the designated driver in the car of North America. And when we look at everybody else who's in the car, be thankful we're at the fucking wheel. And I leave it at that.
Well, and I guess, it's funny because a good chunk of my indignation at the time was like, I'm not that guy.
Yeah.
So like, it's like, it was always like, why are you coming at me? I really don't.
Why am I an ambassador for my whole goddamn country?
It's like, I don't care. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, the border pretty much doesn't exist.
It didn't in those days. You could cross with a driver's license or a Medicare
you could
card.
walk across it.
Oh, beautiful.
Yep. Yeah, I remember. Because I mean, that was the thing on the when you were in high school, your later years of high school, driving up to BC to drink was a thing. Because if you're 18 and a senior in the U.S. But everybody went quiet.
Oh well,
it's been good talking to you guys, but my family's bugging me now, so I gotta jet. But thanks.
All right, well, later, man. It has been a complete, just absolute nonsensical ramble today. So
it's been fun talking to you guys, even if I've mostly been listening.
That's all right,
Logan, man. Don't worry, you're good, bro. You're good.
Come on in anytime.
Well, thanks. I appreciate hearing that I'm good.
All right, have a good day.
You guys take it easy.
Later, man.
Peace. So much with you and I. Let's fight. Yeah.
I wager 50 Quaaludes on the newcomer.
I wager 200 quadloos. Yes, indeed. Indeed, back when things could be allegory without being silly. I think that's one of the big problems for me in gaming these days when I look at what's going on in modern D&D specifically. It's just allegory is lost. It's become a sledgehammer. It's no longer subtle. You know what I mean? It's no longer you got to be clever to pick it up. It's like, here, let me hit you in the face with it. You like that? You know?
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, you see that in like a lot of modern sci-fi media too. And it's like they're just very on the nose. And some people argue, well, we're far past the point where we have to use allegory and innuendo and all of that. I'm like, well, yeah, except for one of the quickest ways to get people to stop listening is to beat them over the head with something. If you can sneak it in and like, yeah, you're right. The guy who's black on one side of his face and white on the other, and the other guy,
yeah.
Maybe they're not so different.
Stupid. You're right. This whole idea based on we're the same thing. We just look a little different.
Exactly. But yeah, it's I don't know. It's one of the biggest problems I think going on in modern gaming circles, and maybe even just specifically in 5e because it is the new hotness and it is what everybody is accessing gaming through. Everybody is D&D players very often are not playing a character that they imagined and created. They're playing themselves as a character. And so there's this weird level of investment that seems to have taken off the self-insert kind of aspect to a lot of people playing games that I think leads to a lot of the trouble with like I don't want my character to ever die. Yeah. I don't remember ever being afraid that my character would. Well, not ever, but I remember rarely caring if my character died because it was just part of the game.
Yeah.
But I won't even say I've read or I've heard. I have read and heard, but I know people who have said, if my character dies, I'm out of the game.
Yeah, well, bye.
Or I'm, or like if that DM ever kills my character, I'm just gonna quit.
Okay, bye is my answer.
Well, yeah, it's true, but it does speak to something. Now, granted, that attitude existed back in the day as well, but
it was the fringe attitude.
I rarely encountered it, and it's the more I think about it, the more it seems to come back to this whole change in perceptions of what your character is.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a character I made up. It's not a character I'm playing. It's not part of a game. It is me with a sword and a Robin Hood hat, or it is me as Hamster Man, or it is me as it is, or in some cases it is me and my opportunity to let out the things that haunt and bother me. This happened with my own kids. My oldest, one of his first 5e campaigns he ran was just rife with his current socio-political outlook on things, and I wasn't going to fault him for it because that's you do you, but at the same time, it was like, okay, can we just kill things and save kingdoms?
Yeah, can we rescue people and overthrow the evil wizard? And does everything have to? Yeah, but here's the thing: so Gen X is a great example of this. I think to some level, based on conversations I had with my father and my mother and stuff I've seen from the boomer generation, I think this is almost it could be for modern generations a uniquely Gen X thing. We didn't see ourselves in the characters on screen. We just saw the characters on screen.
Yeah.
We weren't looking for representations of ourselves. I know my father's generation, he was born in the 30s. They were big on cowboys and whatever they were into, and they always wanted to be those guys and would run around and play those guys and all that kind of weird stuff. When we'd play Star Wars in the schoolyard, none of us were Luke, Han, or Chewie. you know, we were just other guys, you know what I mean, that were fighting the evil empire and what have you, and we didn't care, you know.
Yeah,
It
I mean,
wasn't
I
necessary.
think when you were younger, maybe you were looking for representation, or at least it's still registered with you. Because I remember when I was younger, I thought it was really cool that the kids in ET were like me. You know, they're playing D and
Yeah.
D. They're a bunch of pizza gobbling dicks with like a divorced mom. Yeah, you know,
Yeah.
and so I don't think it was representation on the same level that we're looking for today. Um, that said, I also think that representation is important for you know for demographics who have traditionally not been um, just in a way of like let's just let's move forward and do better. Yeah, but
Well, no, I'm not going to argue or get into that thing with you, but I came up watching Hong Kong cinema. You know
well,
what
yeah,
I mean? Like
yeah,
that
me
was the
too.
lion's share of what I was watching in the late '80s was stuff from other countries and other people that weren't white. So I never felt like there was an issue to be handled if, you know, because I could see the Indian films, I could see the Chinese films, I could see the Japanese films, I could see the films of the other, I could see films from Latin America, from weird Mexican films that were just all about guys in masks fighting zombies and vampires.
Yeah,
So I never felt like there was nothing there, and I never felt like there was a need to add more stuff. But who's my favorite character in Conan? Subutai.
well,
You
yeah.
know, Subutai's my favorite character. That's the guy I love the most. You know, I think
Well,
he's the
and
best
the thing
character.
is, like we had a guy in our group back in the day, and it's kind of funny because nowadays we would just get smacked down so bad we called him Black Sean, not because he was black, but because everything he owned was black. He was black, but he was referred to as Black Sean because we also had a redheaded Sean and we had a couple other Seans. So he was Black Sean because everything he owned and everything he wore was black. His shotgun was black. His shotgun shells were black. His boots were black. His shirt was black. Whatever.
Yeah.
So the thing is, his experience growing up was very different. Like,
Yes.
like and but then again, my cousin, who is, she's well, I'm trying to find the politically correct. Her dad's black, her mom's white.
It's okay. So she's
No,
mixed race. Okay.
exactly. I was trying to remember what the current term is, but
Oh, dude.
her growing up was very different than my buddy Sean, who
Yep.
was also mixed. She was constantly struggling trying to find her face in stuff. Now, as a girl, it may have been slightly different than as just a
Yes.
dorky boy in the 80s, because boys in the 80s just got away with everything and ruled the world. Admit it.
No, man, I got in a lot of trouble. I got a lot
You
of
got in
beats,
trouble, but you also got
and
out of trouble.
yeah, I did, but I did time for my penance, for
Yeah.
my crimes. I didn't
But-
just get like, oh, boys will be boys. No, I
But-
got like, now go paint the
I
fucking
mean,
building.
for her, it went so far as when she got into high school, she used to lie about her heritage and say that she was Polynesian.
Wow.
Because
I guess it's like
because
an
growing up in
American thing.
California, what's funny, she's from California, so it's
Yeah.
not like it's misrepresented, but she's also Northern California, so
I think I have a very skewed perception on this because it is a Canadian thing for us. Like we're different, and this is one of the things we're very different on socially. I grew up in a white town where I didn't see the first non-white, other than natives. I didn't see the first non-white person until I was a teenager, and I came to the cities with my father on trips, and I would see people that weren't white, and it was never an issue for me. It wasn't like, oh, there's something wrong with them or something. It was just okay. Oh, I've seen them on TV, and now I know I've seen them in the real world. Okay, cool. And I think we may have been raised differently culturally for that aspect of it because this is such a country of immigration, and it's such a small population as a result. Because a lot of these issues I'm always hearing from Americans about this makes me go, I don't get it because we didn't have that growing up.
it's funny, I didn't.
Keep talking, I can hear you, but stove's on fire. I'll be right back.
Okay. Beep, 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 beep. So I also have to be very conscious when I'm talking about it that my upbringing, even in the 80s, was very different from a lot of folks. My mother, I always refer to her as a recovering hippie. She worked very hard to make sure I didn't grow up with a lot of hang-ups on race and gender and stuff like that, because that was just her whole hippie ethos, right? So like I played with dolls as a little kid, and some of my dolls were of different skin colors than me, and so I didn't have a lot of that. I always had friends who were different ethnicities, and it never even occurred to me. Like one of my earliest memories, and one of the stories my mom tells me from when I was like 6, is, of course, it's at the time in the U.S. where we're getting a lot of refugees from Cambodia, and this kid had moved in the area. He started going to my school. He didn't speak any English. I, of course, didn't speak any Cambodian. His mother didn't speak any English. And yet he and I would sit and play for hours, and it never even occurred to me that he was different in any other way. And then like I remember, getting into high school, and it was just never a thing for me, but other people it was, and it was always weird that it was a thing for people. I'm like, why? But I also like going back to what I was saying, I have to be very cognizant that my upbringing was a different trajectory from a lot of folks, because my mom did try, and she did put that in there. And so like my best friend in high school, I hate using the term best friend, but I met him in 8th grade in art class, and we were inseparable for forever. Lived together for 10 years after we got out of school, right? He's mixed himself, and and I remember just thinking, when it would ever come up, I'm like, oh yeah, that's right, he's black. He was just my buddy, right? But we run into other groups where it would be an issue. Like I remember having him over at my friend Pat's house. He lived in the neighborhood, and we all hung out and we did D&D for a day, and then Pat had never met him before. And so after I was done, Pat's like, okay, yeah, he can't come over anymore or again. I'm like, why? He's like, because he's black. And I'm like, what? And then I realized, like, oh my God. And then like all of a sudden, like that weird click moment, right? And then where all the flashbacks of everything about this person come okay, yeah. Dad is a gun-toting, hat wearing, baseball cap hair wearing guy who owns an excavation company called Dixie Excavation, with the rebel flag on the door of all his trucks. Oh my God. Kind of one of those moments, like, okay, I didn't even think about it, right? It's like, in a lot of ways, I was very blind to it. And I still am to this day. Like when we moved to this neighborhood here in Missouri, day one, my 2 old white dude neighbors came over. Hey, how's it going, neighbor? Welcome to the neighborhood. Just so you know, this is a black neighborhood. My wife and I are like, okay, so, and then of course the next sentence is like, we've never had any problems with them with them. It was just so awkward coming from the Pacific Northwest too, because that's the other thing about Pacific Northwest.
Yeah, it's super liberal.
Well, it's like we had friends we'd made up there who'd come from Southern Illinois, and they're like, yeah, the week that we left town and moved to started driving up here, there was a cross burning in our neighborhood. I'm like,
yeah, listen, we have racism in Canada. It's not something that doesn't exist. The thing is that it's just, I don't know. I don't know. When I went to high school, I was in the city and everybody was different. My best friend was Jewish. The guy I played D&D with was black. There were the Greek girls I hung out with. It was just, no one cared anymore. Yeah. Like we just kind of were like, fuck, this doesn't define us. Let's just be hanging out together.
Yeah. And that's how I've always been. And so, but at the, and it's weird because it does, I feel like it does put me in a weird place when it comes to understanding the issues with other people that other people do run into, because I'm like, I haven't seen it, it's not been my experience, but then again, I'm not the sum total of everybody, and everybody's experiences is different. Like I know for like the longest time the big thing was denying that women in gaming have had problems, and all I have to do is turn to my wife and ask, you ever have any issues? Yes. And it's because you run into people who are like, well, we always had women in our groups and it was never a problem. Okay, congratulations, your group was good. But I've talked I remember in the 80s, trying to get girls into gaming. First of all, it was really hard because we're still in that period where girls were expected to do girl things. Yeah. And, guys are expected to do guy things. And so, weird, brainy, awkward, gamey stuff was not on their radar. And so that was always weird. But then I had a lot of them. I would run into people like, yeah, I'd like to, but, the guys are all a bunch of dicks. Have you met teenage boys?
Yeah, well, listen, to answer Mark's question, depends where in Canada you are. Certain cities it's an issue, other cities it's not. Depends on the locality, depends on the amount of natives in the area versus the amount of whatever. Some cities like Montreal, we have a huge Caribbean community here, but we see a lot of racism between the French and them as a result. In Toronto, you get all kinds of crazy because it's like, very multicultural. You go to Winnipeg, there's a huge problem with the native and white communities clashing with each other. Vancouver, you have the same thing. So it all depends on the location and what's going on. And it also depends on which natives you're talking about, because you have to understand that there is a staggered exposure to Western culture across North America for the native tribes, especially across Canada. So the Mohawks here in Quebec and the Mi'kmaq the Mi'kmaq in the Maritimes were dealing with white people for literally centuries before the West Coast started being settled, and suddenly the Squamish had to deal with them. You know what I mean? So it just sort of, it's a different timeline, and it's all very fucking stupid, and we all need to just let go of it.
Well, and the other thing too is I think there's a huge tendency for for U.S. Americans to monoculture Canada.
Oh yeah,
like Canada, just like it's a huge ass place, and I'm sorry, Americans, but it's bigger than us.
Mm-hmm.
It goes all the way up, and it's just empty. But
it is. 50% of our population lives in what they call the Quebec-Windsor corridor, which is between Windsor, Ontario, and Quebec City, Quebec.
Yeah,
50% of our population lives there, within 100 miles of the American border.
And when I read comments, when I hear people talking about, who want a monoculture, America can't even actually. Americans aren't even fully aware of just how different places are. I have a buddy of mine who, when I first met him back in the 90s, had recently moved from New Jersey. And he grew up with honest to God school teachers still telling him, or at least believing, that we had an Indian problem here and that we still rode horses to places. And my first response was like, was she fucking with you? I'm like, because seriously, yes, the Pacific Northwest is perhaps a little bit more wild than New Jersey. But
it's a lot more wild than New Jersey.
Well, the Jersey's also the whole thing is there's a lot of Jersey that people don't even think about when they consider Jersey. Just like New York. You talk about New York. Anybody ever thinks about New York, they just think of New York City. There's a whole rest of the state that is actually.
No, I don't. We live right next door to them. We know. We go to Plattsburgh to shop.
Well, I know. That's like but it's so funny. That's weird because that's a weird juxtaposition because New York is always talking about how expensive it is here, but yet a friend of mine moved to some middle of nowhere place, was still in high-speed internet in New York, upstate New York, and was able to find a house at a decent price. So it's like, but America can't even figure out.
When I first went to Vancouver in 1995, I was working as a bouncer, and I was warned right out of the gate by the guys I was working with, this is the wild, wild west. You're not back in Montreal anymore. Be careful. And I giggled and I laughed and I went, come on. And then I saw it in action. I was like, oh, yeah, no, this is different. This is actually very different and much more dangerous than what I was used to. And I think that's one of the problems people have with the Pacific Northwest, or one of the sort of prejudices they have with it, or stereotypes, is it is very violent. Never forget, you guys produce more serial killers than any other state area in the Union.
Lots of out of the way places to bury bodies.
Lots of the Green River Killer was still going on when I first got to the West Coast.
Mm-hmm.
It was actually
the West Coast in general generates not even just the Pacific Northwest. Because think of how many came out of California too.
Absolutely, but the thing about the Pacific Northwest, and this is why when people say Bigfoot, that's so stupid, we would have found him by now. I'm like, have you been to the Pacific Northwest? planes have crashed in those fucking forests
Yeah.
that they haven't found.
I mean, I have other reasons to firmly believe that Bigfoot doesn't exist, but that is a bad argument.
It's
the whole like
worst
you
fucking argument, you know?
exactly. I mean, I just to know just as a piece of life experience, and I'm sure I've shared this on the stream before. Being from the Pacific Northwest and spending my whole life there, like I was born in Portland and like raised and grew up in Washington. 50 years in the Pacific Northwest, right? In and out of the woods all the time, playing in the woods as a kid, going hiking, going camping. But even still, my cousin was able to get me crying terrified when we were like 8 that I was lost in the woods, only to walk me over a hill where there was a freeway and a Fred Meyer's.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, that's how, but no noise traveled from that hub of civilization to where I was in the woods. There was no sign that we were near anything.
Mm-hmm.
But literally I was a walk over a hill from civilization.
So it is the interior of British Columbia, right? It's the interior is what they call it, as opposed to the lower mainland, which is the coastal area. I was shocked at how much, and I'm from a province that has a massive amount of wilderness. I grew up in the country, 12 hours, 10 hours away from the biggest city and stuff like that. And I was like, good God, this place is, sparsely populated at best, like really.
Yeah, it's crazy. And then of course if you're going through the Midwest here, you want to talk empty.
Yeah, but flat.
Well, yeah, but flat. It is going through places like Wyoming or even Montana. You're just like, there's nothing. And it's insane, just how isolated you are, because we drove from Washington to Missouri.
Yeah.
We packed all of our stuff in one of those pods, had it shipped ahead of us, and then put whatever we needed to have with us when we got here into the van and drove. So pets and then our workstations for our jobs. And there were times where I was on roads and there was nobody. I'm on a road, so I know I'm attached to civilization. Yeah. But I'll be damned if we ran into parts of Montana where they actually hadn't had a gas shipment to the gas station for a while because it was so isolated. They were out of gas. I'm like, how is a gas station out of gas?
See, that's heaven to me. Montana, Wyoming, that type of stuff, except for the landlocked aspect of it, that's heaven to me.
Yeah. So I am going to have to start winding things down. We're at the 2-hour mark here, which is where I have to pumpkin, because then I got to go play in Sax's D&D game today. So,
ooh, have fun.
Oh, yeah. I actually, interesting to see where that goes. My
North Central Pennsylvania, talk about nowhere. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a fine force you have there, English.
Maine.
Yep.
I went to Maine, and I spent a month in Maine during the dead of winter. And it was interesting because the entire time I was there, not a flake of snow fell.
Yeah.
I was like expecting all this cool snow. Not a flake of snow fell. But back in Washington, we had enough snow to where it sank a marina.
Huh.
I mean, the snow buildup on the canopies and the docks plunged.
Dude, I lived in the Pacific Northwest. It snows a centimeter and the city shuts down. It's hilarious.
Well, no, we had like a record snowfall. I mean,
I know. I'm just saying,
crazy.
It's not designed to handle snow of any level.
Well, yeah, I love Midwesterners are coming. Yeah, what's wrong? You can't drive in the snow. I'm like, we have something that you guys never have to contend with: hills.
Wow. I wish I could say that was true here, but I live in a mountainous area. Not Rockies, but mountainous. But the thing is
everything in Western Washington is built on a hillside. All coming down from the mountains.
My point is one of the things they tend to forget is, one, you don't have winter tires. And that makes a big difference because summer tires on snow is a nightmare and it's death. Two, the people in the Pacific Northwest, especially on the coastal region, they're not used to snow. Their infrastructure is not designed for snow. They've not been taught how to drive on snow. Of course shit's going to shut down. But the Midwest and people back east hate the West Coast for, many reasons. And any chance we get to stick our nose up at them and go, woo, we do.
Oh, yeah. Oh, and it's always just fun to joke around. But I do have to be calling things quits for the day. Thanks for
Thanks
coming
for
on,
having me
Bear.
on,
Thanks
man.
for everybody else who came on, and everybody in the comments who's been here. Doom Diver, you showed up right towards the end. I'm sorry. But yeah, Mage's Musings has a great channel. Check it out. The Old Geek was on here. Check his channel out. Bear has
Absolutely.
a channel.
Nah, don't pay attention to me. I'm just a surly old Gen Xer.
Well, except for you have really good thoughts and creativity. So definitely go
Oh,
check it out.
stop. You make me blush.
GM Cody, he's got a channel out there too. He's
Great guy.
Great. He's a great guy too. I mean, I've actually just recently started being able to chat with him like outside of comments and streams and stuff. So it's really cool. Who else do I have? From the Hilt, he's got his channel.
Yep.
Mechhead Studios, he's got a channel. We're all just one giant channel verse. Enjoy the
Channelverse. I love it.
Yep, it's the cinematic channel verse. I don't know.
Oh my god, I love it.
So anyways, on that note, I'm going to leave you all. Have a great rest of your Sunday. I'm going to go kick down some doors, kill some shit, and take their stuff. Have a good one.